Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the University of Washington CoMotion Labs Fundamentals for Startups. CoMotion Labs is UW's startup incubator network, and we have 3 spaces dedicated to supporting startups in and around Seattle. We have spaces dedicated to tech and IT startups at Startup Hall, biotech and life science startups at Fluke Hall, and everybody's favorite space, the hardware incubator, dedicated to hardware startups. I'm Brady Ryan, and I happen to manage that hardware space. If you're an entrepreneur looking for space, we are coming back online with co-working. We have room for a few more teams. We don't take any equity. We don't want any of your IP. We just want to host great teams creating cool tech. You can reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat. If you want to learn more, just reach out and we'll get you on board. While we wait for everyone to log in, we'll make a few quick announcements. This is, unfortunately, the last week for our spring series. We're going to take a break over the summer and resume in the fall. All of our Fundamentals for Startups presentations are archived on our CoMotion website under labs/startup training videos. We've covered a ton of topics over the past several years, and so if there's anything you're looking to learn about as far as startups go, there's a good chance that we've covered it, so take a look. This year, we're also proud to partner with Bluetooth to support the Fundamentals for Startups program. And we're going to show you a quick video so you can see how Bluetooth audio sharing is poised to once again change the way you'll experience audio and connect with the world around you.
Bluetooth introduced the world to wireless audio. Calling, listening, watching, making us safer, more productive, more joyful. It's part of the fabric of our lives. Now, Bluetooth will bring us even closer to each other and our world with audio sharing. It will let us share with others our music, our experiences, listening and watching together. The places we go will share with us, enriching our experiences, helping us hear our world. Breaking down barriers between interests, cultures, generations. Introducing Bluetooth audio sharing. Closer together.
Okay, well, today, Shannon Swift, founder and CEO of Swift HR Solutions, is here to share tips on what you can do from the earliest stage of building your team to avoid messy HR distractions as you scale and create an intentional and stage-appropriate HR foundation and culture. This is huge. We've started to see this with a lot of our startups, actually just anecdotally, where if you don't focus on HR until it's a crisis, then it's a huge crisis. And there are steps you can take early on to set yourself up for success and kind of act as an unfair advantage over your competitors who haven't thought about HR yet. Anyway, Shannon is the CEO of Swift HR Solutions, Incorporated, a provider of strategic HR services and products for early stage companies. She just described herself to me as a startup junkie a few minutes ago, so she's one of us. Shannon has more than 20 years of HR experience combined with successful executive level management and business development roles. Prior to starting Swift HR Solutions in 2004, she held executive HR roles at Go Ahead Software, Nastec Pharmaceuticals, and Health Team Northwest, formerly Home Healthcare of Washington. She's also held senior level business development roles in outsourcing firms TriNet VCO and PMSI. Shannon's passion and expertise is in facilitating effective growth, building capacity in organizations. She has extensive experience in growing human resource infrastructure from startup or early stage to mid-stage organizations. Shannon also opened, developed, and managed TriNet VCO's first successful branch office in Bellevue, after which she added managing 4 other branch offices around the country. She works effectively with executive teams and boards of directors to ensure that all HR efforts and results are aligned with corporate values and organizational objectives. Shannon will take all questions via the chat. I'm sure everybody has seen by now, we've got a live chat feature over on the sidebar. So throw questions out throughout the chat and we will get to those. I will now turn the event over to Shannon. Thanks for being here.
Great, thanks, Brady. So I'm a Husky myself, and it's great to be here with you and love the CoMotion series. So thank you for having me and my favorite topic of HR. So let's see. So we're going to just start in the beginning. And I have been really fortunate throughout my career to have been early stage. I was employee number 8 at Home Health Care Washington. We grew to 110 employees. I was number 12 at Go Ahead. We grew to 150. And then throughout my career, I realized pretty early on that I am a startup junkie. And when it gets to 150 employees, I develop a twitch under my eye, and it's time for me to go. I literally develop a twitch. So I love this stage. I love coming in when there's nothing in place. We get to lay a foundation that's very intentional, and you're going to hear me use the word intentional a lot today. And really building an organization from scratch that is not, the HR function doesn't distract the organization. It's just quietly working in the background to support it. So that's my goal for this session, is to just help prevent some of the mistakes that I've seen that early companies tend to make when they don't have HR right out of the gate. So we're going to start with the ugly stuff. So early HR mistakes. So the first one is not talking about culture. So right out of the gate, if you will have a culture, whether you define it or not, and you either let it evolve on its own, or you set out to be very intentional and deliberate about that. So there was a company, I'll just kind of give you a couple of stories. I love stories. And so I saw a company that had 2 ex-Microsoft founders that worked together at Microsoft, got along great. So they said, let's start a company together. And they didn't really sit down and talk about what was important to them from a culture standpoint. And so along the way, some things came out that very quickly, they were about 30 people when this happened. They had venture funding. And the founders had very deep philosophical differences in terms of how they viewed certain things. And it came to a head, and literally like half of the team was lined up behind one and half behind the other. And the investors pulled funding, and the company was gone overnight. And it was solely because of a cultural nightmare. So that's just thing. If they would have started out from the beginning talking about, who are we not, what's important to us personally as founders, they would have avoided that whole outcome. The second one is hiring without a plan. And this is something that, having a process of how are we going to hire, who gets to approve that we have, how do we know that we have a position open, and then what does that process look like? I see a lot of companies doing opportunistic hiring over intentional, we need these skill sets versus, oh, this person just showed up and they're amazing and we've got to have them. And so let's figure out a place to put them. And so sometimes that works out, but more often than not, I see those opportunistic hires tend to cause problems down the road. Overselling the role or overselling resources, taking somebody out of a large company and they come in expecting to have lots of resources that they had there, and this is a startup, they don't have that, and so it's a really difficult shift. So hiring people without their eyes wide open. Something else I see is inflated titles. And I actually just had a conversation with a founder earlier this week, and she has her brand new team. It's going to be the first 6 people. The team is pretty junior, pretty young, and she has a couple of folks in their 20s that have very little work experience. And she's trying to decide if she should give them the VP title or the C title. And I was like, okay, where are they going to go from there? So starting out with an inflated title is really is dangerous. Just one of the things is, that I'm going to talk about today too, is thinking about what's the next step and the step after that and the step after that. And if you start at the top, you've got some problems, especially if you have to hire above a C level. How do you do that? The next one is inflated compensation. So I spoke with a founder once who was about to close his first round of funding. And he said, I'm making my first hire. And I said, great. And he said, it's an engineer and I'm going to pay him $300,000. And I said, whoa. And he said, well, that's what it's going to take. I'm hiring him from Google. And I said, okay, let's just stop for a minute. Let's go to the next step. Is he going to run your engineering department? No, I'm going to have to hire somebody above him. Well, what's that person going to make? And so he kind of went, oh. So we stepped back and said, okay, what's a reasonable salary? And then let's build in some milestone incentives so that we can get him where you need to land him, but we're not killing our compensation plan right out of the gate. The next one is giving too much too early. This, especially around benefits, I see founders want to give 100% of medical for employees and dependents, and 401k with a match, and again, you're not really giving yourself room. The only thing that you can do at that point is to take away, and it's a lot easier to give than to take away. So giving too much too early is definitely something that will distract the organization. Okay, so we're going to learn how to not make these mistakes. So this is all about laying an intentional foundation for your startup. So the first one is around culture and values. So I like to say define and articulate early. So as a startup, you're going to hit bumps in the road, and you either will have people bound together and push through those obstacles, or they'll go flying out the window and off to some other company. So really, this laying your culture and values and being, I say, institutionalized. So what that means is once you define who you are, make sure that every single thing that touches the team is consistent with that. It should be built into everything. And then be true to who you are and who you aren't. So I'll give you an example. When I was at Go Ahead Software, we started in Australia. We were a meritocracy. We did not want arrogance. We wanted to really weed arrogance out. And so when we had a very, very difficult technical position to fill, we had a candidate, and I was the one that was like, oh my gosh, this person is exactly what we need technically. And the CTO said, okay, Shannon, what about culturally? And I went, and he said, we're passing. And so that really is, being really protective of who you are and true to who you are. And the team sees that, and that really sets a solid foundation. So being not afraid to make those tough calls if something isn't consistent, and really basic compatibility is the basis for commitment. So again, it's like when you hit those bumps, people will stick around if they feel like they're bringing their whole self to work every day. So values. So there are a couple of ways that you can define values if you haven't gone through this exercise. A really simple, quick one that I've done with a couple of small companies is just to sit around a table and think about who's my favorite person I ever worked with, and then what was it about that person that was so great. And those words that you use to describe that person are probably going to emerge as some values that you want for your own organization. So that's a really quick, easy way to come up with at least a framework to work from right out of the gate if you don't have time to go through a full exercise. If you do want to put a little more effort into it, the process that I like to do is I have 12 questions that I will ask the employees. So they're questions like, why did you choose to join the company? So this is fairly early on, maybe around, 10 employees or so you can do this. Why did you choose to join the company? How do you describe how we treat one another, how we treat our investors, how we treat our customers, how we treat our vendors? And what are the words you use to describe the environment when you're talking to people that just casually at a party, hey, what's it like working there? So it's questions like that. I go through and just pull those out. And then I have another culture interview for the founders. And it's going to be things about, what are the words that they want people to use to describe them? What are the soft skills that they want every single person in their company to have? Things like that. So taking all of that data, pulling it all together, pulling out those common themes, and then having a meaningful acronym is kind of, it makes it easy to remember. So mine is SWIFT. So we have service, win-win, integrity, fun, and trusted. So it's super easy to remember. And then making sure that you have group ownership. So what I like to do is draft up the values, take them back to the team, and then let people fill in how they define each one of those. So, what does service mean to us? And so let people build those out and define each of the values. So once they see their own words being used, the result is that you have this team that is fiercely protective of those values and making sure that we're living up to them. So that's a process of just defining who you are. And then after we've got the culture and values articulated, I'm going to dive into strategic human capital planning. And human capital planning, I've got three areas here that we're going to cover philosophically. And this is, again, just early conversations. The earlier you can have these conversations, the more solid your foundation is going to be, the less distractions you'll have down the road. So the first one is recruiting. And these are just some samples of what I've used throughout my HR career, working with startups. And I love early stage technology startups are my passion. So first of all, recruiting is everyone's job. So when I started Go Ahead, we had 12 people. We were growing rapidly. We just closed our Series A funding, and I was not going to be responsible for all the recruiting. That was going to be across the team. Like we all get value from our equity when we hire the right people and the company's making progress. So everyone was responsible for participating. Hiring for long-term retention, and that is, we're a startup. We're going to change. We're going to pivot. We're going to have to adapt to different things that come at us. And so hiring for long-term retention, somebody that's going to be resilient, that's going to be, a continual thirst for learning, and will be able to grow and change with us. Hire for the whole. And so what I mean by that is getting people involved with the interview process, that it may not be for their department, but they're looking out for the whole organization. Is this person a good fit for the entire group, or for somebody else's group? If they're not a fit for mine, might there be a better place for them over in another group? And then this is like the most important: when in doubt, do not hire. And I think all of us can think about situations where we worked with somebody that was just completely not a right fit, and how distracting that is, and how many hours there are in a day when you're working with somebody that is not who we really want to have in the organization. So if your gut is telling you something, listen to it. You can go back and build data around it, but if you have a niggling question about somebody, listen to that and don't hire. And then another thing to think about as you're thinking about your recruitment philosophy is, what are your team diversity goals? So more and more often, which is wonderful, I see companies right out of the gate that have certain objectives that they want to have for what their team looks like. And so going into the growth phase, having that in mind is super helpful to be able to have those, again, intentional outcomes. So in addition to the recruiting philosophy, it's really helpful to have a compensation philosophy, is what I've found. And so first of all is, how do we want to position ourselves relative to market? Somebody is always going to be willing to pay more, and that just is the way it is. So if you're trying to go in and say, okay, we're just going to have the highest compensation, you're going to run out of money really quickly before you have the team that you need. So really think about that. And I'll use Microsoft as an example. For the first 20 years, Microsoft was very vocal about the fact that and candid that they were about 20% below market. And so you didn't go to Microsoft to get the biggest salary. You went because they had equity, and so they used that. That was their philosophy. And then over time, as the equity wasn't as valuable, they had to bring the salaries up. So think about how you want to position yourself. Do you want to be deliberately below market, and just be open about that, and then make up for it with equity and great benefits? That was something that we did in the early days at Go Ahead, is we said, okay, who's our demographic, and we're going to go heavier on the benefit side than the salary side. So just put your flag in the ground wherever it is that you're going to be, and then think about your compensation mix. So we have there's salary, which is going to be immediate compensation. We have incentive compensation, which is more of a midterm. It might be a monthly or quarterly or even annually. And then we have equity, which is a long-term play. And so be aware of the different aspects of compensation that you have, and benefits is part of that as well. And then I like to say guardrails is the word I use here. Put together a hiring pro forma. And so this is something that's really important. Zillow was one of my early clients with Swift HR Solutions. And we had people that came that didn't care about salary at all. They're just like, I want equity. This is going to be this amazing company. And they were right. And I just want equity. Well, if you go really heavily weighted on equity and you go really ridiculously crazy low on the salary side, over time, your compensation structure is going to be really wacky. And so what we did is we put some ranges for, here's your salary range, here's the equity range. So if somebody came in and said, I don't care about salary, we'd say, okay, you're going to get the lowest salary in your offer and you'll get the highest equity. And then conversely, if somebody said, I care a lot about equity, but I've got bills to pay, I've got kids in college or whatever the situation is, then okay, then we'll go higher on the compensation on the base salary side and lower on the equity. So we had some guardrails to kind of keep us themselves within some boundaries. And so over time, that compensation structure started out high integrity, and I have no doubt that today it still is. So give yourself kind of just a really simple pro forma as you're bringing on your first positions. So then the questions to ask yourself are, does actual make sense? So what this is, assume that people are going to share information. So if somebody were to see the compensation laid out for the whole company, would they say, yeah, okay, that makes sense? Or is it completely no integrity to it? So just people will talk and they will share information. So just make sure that you're looking at the 10,000 foot view and that your compensation structure makes sense. Internal equity versus external. So this is, are we trying to compare salaries with Amazon and Google and Facebook and Microsoft, or are we just more concerned about like, this is our pool of team and this is how we're going to compensate people? So I've focused much more on internal equity, what we're paying our team relative to each other. And it kind of comes back to that, does the actual make sense? But internal equity is at this early stage is going to be more important to you than what the market's doing. So benefits philosophy. This one is going to really depend a lot on who your team is and who you want to be attracting over the coming months and years. So putting yourself, are we at market? I typically say that that's about 20% of base salaries. That is the budget that I want to work with if I want to be kind of at market for benefits. If I have people that are very highly seasoned, they all have, kids in college, maybe single income homes, and they care more about benefits, then I might go up to 22% on the benefits. And then if I've got a really scrappy group that's all young and never goes to the doctor, doesn't really care about benefits, we just want to have like a solid plan in place, that nothing over the top, I might do 17 or 18% for benefits. So again, thinking about, and it's all back to intentionality. It's like, who are we? What are we going to look like? What do people care about? Let's do that. So lay out a plan that meets the needs of the team that you're going to attract. Then I like to, yeah, Brady.
So that can change over time though, right? This isn't a situation where the die is cast and the company has to decide on day 10 how they're going to operate into the future. They can continue to be nimble.
Yes, absolutely. And what I was just going to say is starting conservatively. So, put a very conservative plan in place to start, and then you can add. It's always easier to give than it is to take, and to add than it is to take away. And so over time, I like to start conservatively and say, okay, if things are going well, next year we're going to add some dependent coverage for benefits, or next year we're going to add a long-term disability plan. Next year we're going to add our 401k plan, and then maybe the year after that, a match if things are going well. You can always accelerate if things start to really speed up, but you're not putting yourself in a place where you're going to end up having to pull things back. And then to your point, your question, you want to survey your team every year. So I had a company that I started with, let's say 16 employees. We grew to 75 before they were acquired. And what happened the first year when I was looking at the benefits plan, we had a bunch of single people. And then the next year, all of a sudden we'd had a bunch of weddings. And so now we had spouses. And then like another year went by and all of a sudden we started having children. And so we responded to that by increasing the benefits over time. So we put in 25% dependent coverage, and then the next year we brought it up to 50%. And we started making the benefits a little richer. So definitely it will change over time. It's dynamic and you need to respond to that. So definitely not putting something in place and leaving it there and moving on. Does that answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so now we start to add to the team, and so we're going to start to put some of these things into play. The first one is an organizational recruitment approach. So really, again, I encourage you to think about a headcount forecast. I love pro formas. So we've got a compensation pro forma. We've got a headcount pro forma that's going to say, okay, these are the positions we think we're going to need. Build in a couple of extra C-level because it happens, and then we don't want to run out of equity, and so we want to make sure that we're conservative on our headcount forecast. So just what are the positions that we're going to need? When are we going to need them by? And then we can put some strategies in place. Again, I like to see the philosophy of recruitment as everyone's job, especially if we're giving equity. You know, we all benefit from that. So, and what I mean by everyone's job, everybody can source. Like, who did I work with that was like the best of this particular role that we need, and reaching out and saying, hey, I'm at this company. You need to come work with us. Selling. So when you're talking to candidates, you know, talking about the reasons that you chose to be there, and what are the great attributes about the company that matter to that candidate that you should call out. And then selecting, being part of the interview loop. So I like to involve the whole company in that. The 3 reasons everyone should care about the recruiting process. So the first one is obvious, like we need the people in the roles to do the work. The second one, though, is one that we don't really think about, but we all experience it. Recruiting is a huge time suck. So, you know, I mean, all of the time looking at resumes, talking to candidates, talking to each other about the candidate, it's a huge amount of time. And so we want to make sure that our process is really efficient and effective so that we're maximizing the use of our time. And then the third reason that we should care about the recruitment approach and our process is that this is establishing our employment brand. So people don't know who we are. And I remember at Go Ahead Software, Paul Allen had GoToNet. And that was super helpful for us because people thought that they were talking to a Paul Allen company. They're like, oh yeah, I've heard of you. And they really hadn't, but that we use that as just to get the candidates in the door. So that misconception. So recognize that every candidate is having an experience with you. They're leaving, they're talking about that experience to other people. The brand starts to be created in the community, and you want that to be intentional. That's back to the intentional word. What are the words you want coming out of that candidate's mouth? And let's make sure that we're having that experience. So the other comments around the organizational is fit. So values and culture are equal weighting, and maybe even heavier in some positions to technical skill. And so really, again, going back to who are we as an organization, who do we want to bring into the organization, and does this candidate fit that profile? Having cross-functional interview loops is really going to ensure success, especially when you sit around and say, okay, what did you think about the candidate? And everybody is like, yes, this is the right candidate. When that person starts, they're going to be set up for success because everybody has put their rubber stamp on them, and they're going to do everything they can to help that person be successful. So having cross-functional interview loops, getting people involved at the smallest stage is really a way to ensure forward success. So stage appropriate and culturally aligned HR. This is really what I see is a huge area that will keep you from being distracted by HR at the earliest stage. Don't be tempted to bring in that 60-page employee handbook from your previous employer. It doesn't fit. So throw that thing out. There is actually no legal reason to have an employee handbook. There are some things that legally we need to communicate, and you can do it in a much abbreviated format. So what I like is just a really practical employee guide. It's, here's when paydays are and how payroll works, the timing of the pay dates. Here's how time off works. Here's how we handle jury duty and bereavement and parental leave. So really just going through, just briefly covering those things. Here are holidays, and you can update it every year. So if the 4th of July is on a Friday, you might want to or is on a Saturday, you'll take the Friday off. So you'll update that as appropriate. And so making sure that everything that you're doing is stage appropriate. The orientation program, this is something that is a total differentiator. And I know at Zillow from the earliest stage, I had people going through this orientation program saying, oh my gosh, when I got to Amazon, I had to run for 2 weeks to find this stuff for myself. And you're giving it to me on my first day, and you're a startup. And so the orientation program doesn't just cover HR and benefits, which we need to, it covers housekeeping. So all of the facilities type of information. How do I find whatever it is? And then we talk about company. What's the company history? Where'd the name come from? Who's our customer? What's our big vision? Where are we going? What happened before I got here? And now where are we going together forward? And then also the business. So making sure that everybody understands what our business is, that we listen in on a demo or watch a demo, we listen in on a sales call, whatever it is that everybody in the company needs to have as that foundation when they start. You can do this in a brainstorm session and literally just get around a table and say, what does everybody need to know to be successful here? And then you'll put it into these buckets and create checklists and make sure that everybody that starts gets a really solid foundation. And they'll know that they made a great decision to come on board. Having scalable processes over policies. I'm really policy averse, but I love processes. And so policies I think are made to be broken. I was with a startup that wanted on the first day that I was with them, they said, we need a vacation policy. And I said, oh, okay, what do you mean? Well, so-and-so just said that he wants next week off, and, he should have to give us at least 2 weeks notice before he asks for a week off. And, if he's going to take 2 weeks, it should be like a month or something. You come up with it. And so I went back to my desk and I actually did a memo that said, so you want to take time off, ? And it was like, use common sense. Like, we're small, we can't have everybody gone at the same time. If you want to take time off, give us as much notice as you can, because we might have to turn you down. So it was really just guidelines and a process versus having this like tight policy that we were going to break. And then one of the benefits of working with a startup is access to the CEO. We're a flat organization; everybody has access, and so use that to your advantage. So when we have new team members come on, we can really, give everybody that one-on-one interaction and access. So some of the best things in the workplace can be free. We don't have to have super expensive programs. We can do fun events that don't cost anything. Little contests. We can have when we're back in offices again, we can have potluck lunches. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we can do to have fun and really get celebrate our culture and who we are without spending a bunch of money. So just think about what stage you're at, what the culture is, and then align everything along with that. Okay, so the downside, breaking up, and it will happen. We're going to have situations. So a quote that a client I had in the past, I love this quote so much because it's so true. People are hired for what they know and fired for who they are. So it's back to that culture fit. So sometimes we just screw it up. I had a QA engineer one time that we had grown very, very rapidly. We took a series of funding and it was Series C funding, and we hired like 50 people in one quarter, and we had a misfire. So we did a pretty good job, but we had one QA person that just was clearly not a cultural fit. And the company was it was a very flat organization. It was a meritocracy. It was the Australia-based company I referenced earlier. And he was always trying to get the big guys' attention. And he just had very, very different priorities than the rest of the team. And just before his 3-month anniversary, he came into my office and said, I'm leaving and I need you to know why. He said, everyone is so great here. Everybody's really nice, but I just don't belong. And I said, I know. And I said, I'm sorry that we brought you on and put you in this position. And but to me, the positive side of that was he demonstrated that our culture was really strong. I mean, he was ejected like a virus out of our culture. And so that was the downside, but he wasn't fired. He resigned, but it was who he was versus what he knew. And he was super successful and happy in his next company. Focus on the health of the whole team. So if you have a cancerous tumor, you know that you've got a situation with an employee that is just making everybody miserable and that it's not a fit. Focus on the whole team. You've got to get out of put yourself in that uncomfortable place of taking action because you're taking care of the whole. So don't be afraid to respectfully make a change. And I say respectfully, go back to your culture and values. So 4 questions that I like to ask before I take action is the first one is, does the person know what's wrong? So have we had a candid conversation about what's wrong? The second one is, do they know what they need to do to fix it? So do they know what success looks like? The third one is, do they know what's going to happen if they don't fix it? So have we given them that final notice? You know, we've had several conversations about this and we're not seeing improvement. And the next conversation that we have, if it's not changed, is going to be talking about your termination. So it's really, it's very fair, no surprises. The fourth question is, have we done everything we can to set this person up to be successful? And if you can answer yes to those 4 questions, you need to move forward. And it doesn't have to be a long drawn out process. It might be, depending on what the situation is, it might be just a matter of a couple of weeks. But going through that has always been my rule of thumb in terms of making changes, and have never had somebody say that they weren't treated fairly in going through that. Situational, so the punishment should fit the crime. There are situations where you don't even want to go through that. It's just very clear that we need to make a change right away. And so leave yourself that as an out as well. And then layoffs. So layoffs are a bummer. I mean, it's not somebody's fault. It's you know, the company has had something hasn't gone well. We didn't get funding. We didn't get that big client that we needed, and we need to again take care of the health of the whole team. But I think the thing that I just really encourage companies to do, again, it's the less comfortable thing to deal with, but remember your values and be true to who you are, even when somebody's going out the door. And so, I mean, I've had a company picnic that was planned for like 2 weeks after we did a big layoff. And I asked the team what they wanted to do with that. And they said, we need to invite people back to it. And we did. We didn't cancel the picnic. We said, hey guys, you know, that was no fault of your own. Not everybody felt comfortable coming back, but a lot of people did. And so just, you know, remember who you are, and don't let that fall by the wayside when things aren't going well. I think you need to fall back on values even more when things aren't going well. So just to kind of wrap up, so remember, you want to be intentional. That's my word of the day, is intentionality. Be stage appropriate and true to your values. Don't be afraid to quickly correct mistakes when something isn't going well, and remember to enjoy the journey. I think the startup phase is so much fun, and whether it ends in success or not, it's having fun along the way and enjoying the journey. And a big part of that is building your company the way you want to from the beginning. So I'll turn it back to you, Brady.
That was great. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I don't feel like we talk enough about HR in the startup world. There's a lot of fun stuff people like to talk about, like raising money and all that, but this is the stuff that makes the company go, and I love that we're starting to focus on that more. I've got a few questions, and please, anybody that has questions, throw them in the chat and I'll get those asked as well. But you gave the example very early on about the startup who imploded because the 2 founders weren't seeing eye to eye or hadn't kind of clearly communicated the culture they were looking for. Can you give us an example of what those philosophical differences were that drove the company into the ground, unfortunately?
Yeah, this will kind of give you a sense of how long ago this was earlier in my career. So it was my first outsourcing role that I was in. So back then, when you set up your benefits plan, you had the option of offering dependent coverage and oh my gosh, I'm just going to completely blank on the term, domestic partners. And so, you know, do you want to offer domestic partner insurance or not? So to people that are not married. And so when we were putting the benefits plan in place, one of the founders said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't encourage that kind of lifestyle. And the other founder said, well, we have a gay employee that has a partner. Like we need to offer insurance. Like, yes, we need to offer that for them. And so, I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, wow, guys, this is like a huge wedge that they just completely were in opposite views on how they were going to, what they were going to provide for their employees. And so, so that was one example of what was going on there.
And I think for me, and maybe for other folks that have kind of thought about culture, right? And we hear that you need to be intentional about it. You need to reinforce culture, and you need to think through it and be active and not reactive. I really love the example you gave of thinking of the favorite person you ever worked with and describing them and using that as values to kind of drive it. But could you articulate another culture that was either clearly defined intentionally or got kind of deeply entrenched, but it was undefined and it was unintentional, just to kind of help folks understand what does describing culture even sound like?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one organization that I started working with, and it was an ex-Microsoft company, or the founder was from Microsoft, and from the kind of the Microsoft that was very known as being very combative, right? Very competitive. So you'd have meetings where people would just be yelling at each other and really like trying to get their point across and win. And the other, so half of the team was kind of that mindset. The other half had come out of like very collaborative, like, we make a decision together as a team and then we go forward. If we, disagree, we agree to disagree. And when we walk out of that room, we're consistent, like we're together. And it was so dramatic to watch in a meeting, the two factions that were there. And so what I said to the CEO was, okay, you made a choice not to go through this exercise of defining who you are, but now you have to say which one is okay, because both behaviors are not okay. So we have people that are not talking and sharing and contributing because they don't want to get attacked. And then you've got these other people that are just completely, in this competitive mode. And it's not that there's a wrong or a right, but you have to pick, like, which one are you? And then let people self-select if they want to be in that environment or not. But I mean, it really was that dramatic to see just in typical day-to-day interactions where that riff was, and needing to resolve it.
Yeah, I guess that speaks directly to how folks are going to work together or not. So are there a couple steps that a company can take once they go through the exercise and the effort of understanding what they want their culture to be, they communicate it out, and then what steps can you take to reinforce that, to make sure that stays top of mind, to make sure that employees are hearing that and buying in or behaving in such a way that is consistent with your values?
It's a great question. So I think, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with regard to institutionalizing your values and your culture. And it's really anything that touches the team. So one demonstration is, definitely hiring. So are we hiring people that fit who we are? The other is in promotions. So are we recognizing and promoting people that are demonstrating the things that we want to see for our organization? And again, there's no wrong or right. There's just who are we and who are we not? And so promotions is one area. Performance reviews. What are the things that we are judging performance against, and are they consistent with who we want to be as an organization? It has to do with decisions, like business decisions that we have to make. So we're faced with a situation, and we're like, how are we going to resolve this? Well, let's go back to our values, and what do our values say that we should do to resolve this? So it's, avoiding conflict, making decisions, how we're recognizing and compensating, rewarding people. So it's really, again, like anything that touches the team, it should be consistent.
Sure. And I love that approach you described, where you can use the culture and values that you have stated and hold that up kind of as a North Star in decision making, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think a lot of folks have probably been a part of organizations where there's the values and there's the mission statement and there's the culture that is stated. It's on paper somewhere, but it doesn't.
Well, Brady, I think you're hitting on a really important point too, and that our business might completely pivot. So we could start out going down the line with, this is going to be the product that we're putting together, and then we get some market data that says either that product is not wanted, there's nobody to buy it, or there's another competitor that just came in and they're further along than we are, and we have to completely pivot the business a different direction. But the values typically don't pivot. So the mission might change, but the values typically will not. It's like, who are we is going to stay consistent.
Yeah, I like that. A question from Magali. She asked, first she said she liked your advice about trusting gut feelings. And also I did too. I wrote that. Every time I get burned by somebody, part of me knew I was going to get burned by that person.
Yeah.
And I just didn't listen to it. But she asks, how do you sort of distinguish between that sort of gut feeling that you need to listen to and a gut feeling that's like grounded in implicit bias?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I think so. then what I really want to do is when I have this gut feeling, I'm going to try to get data behind it. And I'm intuitive. That's my nature is intuitive. So I usually like know something pretty quickly, but then I have to build data to say, okay, why am I feeling this way? Or why do I think we should do this? And so one of the things I think that, especially in the hiring process, is making sure that you have consistent questions for each candidate for a role, and that those questions are really focused on what we need for success for this position. So I think that's so that if you have one person in front of you, you're not going off in a different direction with them than you are somebody else that's maybe a different gender or a different race or a different age, that you're being consistent in what you're looking for, and that you're looking at those questions in a way that, why am I asking this question, and what is it going to tell me about the candidate to help me make a good decision? So I think that being able to focus on, again, I love hiring to values. It really allows you to build a very diverse team that has commonality, that doesn't have anything to do with age or gender or race or anything else. It's just a common set of what's important, what motivates us, what we care about, how we look at relationships and our customer. So I think that having those questions is really defined is an important key.
Yeah. Luke asked a question that I think you'll call back to that, being guided by certain things you put in place. But he says, how do you handle an employee that's a great fit for their role when your company is 20 employees, but not a great fit at 150? So as the company scales, and how do you prevent that? I mean, is that where consultants come in, or is that like accelerated vesting? What tools do you like?
Well, all of the above. And I think, this happens with founders too. So you can have co-founders, and, one of the co-founders, is hits a stage where it's like they're no longer, this is no longer working. And yeah, you can do things like, accelerating stock options and doing things to help with the transition. Back to my eye twitch, like I know about myself that when it gets to 150 employees, it's not fun for me anymore. And and I can start being miserable. And I need to go back to an early stage. So so there are founders that are definitely startup founders. And then there are founders that you see that carry it through, like, Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, that, took it all the way through to this, to a very mature stage. That's rare. I think it's more often that I see founder entrepreneurs come in and say, okay, I'm going to grow this. And if we don't have a liquidity event before a certain point, I'm going to need somebody else to come in as CEO. So, and then just the same thing with employees. There are startup people that just thrive in that scrappy environment. And then as the organization grows and roles become more specified, right? It's like you start out and everybody's like doing everything. And then as you grow, people tend to slot into more narrow positions. And so I think it's really creating an environment where people can be very open, can speak openly about how they're feeling, having those conversations around career development and paths, so that what's going on with your team member. And look at different solutions. Is it, we can put you in a different role in the department, so you're going to grow and learn something new that will be, valuable for the organization, because you're going to be crossing over different functions, which is always a great thing to keep walls from being built up as you grow. Or is it getting somebody on a management path? Is it getting them on a technical path and providing some more development for them? But I think a lot of it is the managers speaking with their employees on a regular basis, having that open dialogue about what's working and what isn't. I'm actually not a fan of the big, huge formal performance reviews any longer. It's like, people hate them, and it's like this big event where we should just have a continual conversation. So let's just touch base on, what are you working on? What are your obstacles? What do you need from me? What am I seeing in terms of, progress and what needs to happen? And then once or twice a year, focusing on professional growth, focusing on, career path growth, and having those conversations so that you can help somebody transition out if that's what makes sense, or you can help them transition to another department or a different role. But I think the open dialogue is really the way to have a successful outcome either way.
Sure. Jeffrey Campbell is curious about kind of the intersection between behavioral theories and scaling strategies for startups. So I think kind of a related question he followed up with is, how much does psychology play a role in your strategy and recommendations to startup founders?
Well, interestingly enough, I was a psych degree. That was my degree from the UW. I'm not sure I understand the question completely.
Sure. The first question. So this is on me as a question asker. I tried to smush two questions together. The first one was he's curious how much you lace behavioral theories with the scaling strategies of a startup. For instance, cognitive theories or needs-based theories, intrinsic and extrinsic theories. So I guess, is there a psychology book on your desk that you're referencing when you're talking to founders and putting together strategies?
I don't really prescribe to any particular, there's lots of, I'm surrounded by books in here right now, and lots of founder theory books, and but I think it really just comes down to individuals. It's people all have something that they are looking for in what they're doing. So if it's a founder that is, has an idea that they're taking forward, there's a reason that there's something that's driving them to do that. And so really just, I think, understanding like what is the company's objective? What are we trying to accomplish? What's a successful outcome? And what's driving and motivating somebody every day. So I don't tend to bring in a lot of theories into the relationships. For me, it's more just learning the individual,
Sure.
And then how can we be successful? How can we get to where you're trying to go,
Sure.
and lay a plan out.
You mentioned all your books, and that's great timing because Luke asked if you had any books you'd recommend on scaling a team and organizational health from 0 to, say, 1,000 employees and associated business stages.
Well, okay, and remember again that 150 is kind of my cap.
Sure. Yeah, you're out of there. But.
So we'll get the big HR scaling person in here. For me, it's I read a lot of leadership books, and it's more around the team dynamic. So I love Brene Brown, Dare to Lead. I love Warren Rustand has some great leadership books. Marshall Goldsmith. I think it's looking a lot at leadership development. So I spend a lot of time just as an organization is growing leaders and helping people figure out what their leadership style is. And, Leadership is an Art is one of the first leadership books that I ever read early in my career. And it was about servant leadership. And that's kind of been my style of leadership ever since. It's like, how do I remove obstacles and help people be successful and set them up to accomplish what what we need them to do and what they want to do for themselves in the organization. So I think, it's a lot of around helping, if we're developing our leaders, I think we have happier teams overall. And so just putting a lot of different, we do a lot of DISC with teams and also with individuals, just the self-awareness and awareness of others, and that working, how we work well together and where the rubs might be and how we overcome that. So it's conflict resolution styles. I love, the Thomas Kilmann model. And it's great when you can be in a meeting and somebody can say, hey, you're going into compete mode. And then somebody isn't talking and you're like, okay, I know that you're an avoider. So, we need to hear what you're thinking. So I think, just anything that you can do to help teams have that self-awareness and awareness of each other is to really be effective working together.
Absolutely. I have just a few more kind of tactical questions. If anybody else has more questions, please feel free to hop on the chat. But one thing I'm always curious about talking to HR folks is your thoughts on unlimited PTO. And if that works, if you have any horror stories or success stories there. I always hear about it, and we do not have unlimited PTO at UW. And I'm curious if that can work and how it is in practice.
Yeah. So the first thing that I'll say, Brady, is that we will reframe it as self-managed PTO, because it really isn't, as you said, unlimited PTO. And so the concept started. I think it's always helpful when there's a trend that comes out like this, is to look back and like, where did it come from? And this came from Netflix. It came out of California, and it was because in Washington here we have the decision that we can make when somebody leaves the organization whether we're going to pay out accrued time or not. California does not have that same option, so they consider accrued time to be earned wages. So when somebody leaves, so say you have a startup, nobody can afford to take time off because we're just running 1,000 miles an hour, and so somebody, we do a layoff, and we have to, somebody gets laid off, we have to pay out sometimes like a pretty big number if they haven't established like a maximum accrual. And so what Netflix did to get around that was this concept of unlimited PTO. We're just not going to accrue it. And if we don't accrue it, then there's nothing to pay out. And so that caught on like wildfire, and really, quickly it became obvious that it's not unlimited. And so the way that we, but there are situations where, and teams where that works really well. And it's, so I think if you, if you put some parameters around it and you say, okay, if you're going to take time off, it still has to be approved that you're going to be out when you are out. You need to let your teammates know that you're going to be out. You have to make sure that whatever priorities you have are covered, that, people know what to do if you're not here. So that's why we kind of like, I like the term self-managed.
Sure.
But it doesn't work for every company. So again, it kind of comes back to like, who are we, who's our demographic? What works for us for this particular group? There was a company I started working with that was small. And so, less than 20 people. And I was interviewing each of the employees, just getting to know them, and kind of like, I was asking about kind of culture type questions about the organization, and several people volunteered to me that they had, they didn't know how much time they had available. And I said, well, it's just, you can take time, just anytime you want to take time off, you just need to ask to take the time off. And they said, well, we know that that's what the founder has said, but we look around and we don't see anybody taking time off. So just tell us what's fair. Like, I just want to know what's fair. Like, can I take 3 weeks or 4 weeks? Like, just give me my bucket and I'll work within that. So in that environment, people didn't want the freedom that the founder was intending for them to have. They felt like they needed some parameters to it. So I think, you need to just protect the organization and the team, and make sure that you've got again, I'll use the word guardrails again. You've got some parameters that make a unlimited or self-managed PTO program work. And I do see it work in a lot of companies.
Yeah. And I can definitely see how it would get there, where folks look, where there would be weird expectations around using that self-managed or / unlimited PTO. But I'd imagine that you see it as partially a failure of leadership when that happens to establish and reinforce that culture, right? Because if these founders are saying this for the right reasons, not to avoid cashing out time off when somebody leaves, but to, support the full person that works there, partially it's going to be up to them and the founders that are listening today that want to implement this to, lead by example, show that, we really mean this.
Yeah. Yep. And encourage people to take time off if they realize that they haven't. That's something that I will look around, and if I see somebody behaving differently than they usually do, they're shorter, they're like kind of, super, like people are walking on eggshells around them. And then I'm like, okay, when was the last time you took time off? And it's like, okay, you need to go, you need to go have some breathing time. So I think that's part of a manager's role, as well as knowing their team and when they need a break and taking care of them.
I just didn't realize how far along we were. One last question from Luke.
Okay.
He wants to know how you can assess if a recruit is ready / able to make the jump to a startup if you were hiring them out of kind of corporate work.
That is such a great question. And I've had people that I've interviewed for a technology role coming out of Boeing, and people go, oh my gosh, we can't hire a Boeing person. They're never going to work in a startup. And they hated Boeing, and they loved the energy of the startup. And so it was a great hire. So I think one thing is just making sure that your candidates have their eyes wide open and that you're not just putting on like all of the happy frosting and sprinkles that you want them to see, but that they really know what it's like to be there. And so that cross-functional interview loop, again, I think can be super helpful. So I think, people can self-select if an environment's not going to work for them, but be realistic about, hey, we don't have a lot of resources. We all are, we're all taking the garbage out. I mean, it's, we're doing whatever's needed here, and make sure that people that are coming into the organization are making the decision with their eyes wide open.
Perfect. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Great questions in the chat. Everybody, thank you for bringing your A game on the questions today. Big thank you to you, Shannon, for sharing your wisdom and time with us here. I'm glad we're starting to look more at HR and how to run a grown-up company from the get-go.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, as a reminder, this is the last fundamentals until the fall. We're going to take a big, long break, get out there and get some sun, everybody. Look forward to seeing you in the fall. In the meantime, please do reach out to anybody at CoMotion Labs if there's anything we can help you with, whether that's finding a great person like Shannon to talk to about HR, or whether that's co-working, whatever it is, we're here to help. All in all, everybody, thank you so much, and we'll see you in the fall.
Great. Thanks.